Let's once again finish a section with a nice coding challenge so that we can practice everything that we learned in the section. And I can't stress enough how important these challenges are. So please don't skip this video right now. So we are going to build this very simple tip calculator. So here you can input how much the bill was. So let's say $100. And then you can say how satisfied or dissatisfied you were with the service and your friend. So let's say that two people were out for dinner, and then basically together you decide how much the tip should be. So for example, if you say it was good, that can be 10%, but your friend says 0%. And so then the average between the two of you is 5%, which is indeed these $5 here. And so the final bill is $105, which is 100 plus the $5 tip. And of course, if your friend found it absolutely amazing, then here the average between the two of you is 15, and therefore it is a $15 tip. And as you change the value here, of course, it keeps updating down here. You also have this reset button that you can click, which will set everything back to the initial values. Now, as you build this, I want you to create one separate component for each of these pieces. So this one here should be one component. For example, it can be called the bill input. Then you should have one component for this, for example, called select percentage, and then reuse that component here again. So with some different text, but it should be the same component. Then here you have some output component for displaying this text, and then a reset component just for this button. Okay? Now these three inputs here, they are of course controlled elements, and so you can start by adding their state value into the component itself, but you will soon notice that you actually need this state in the parent component, because you will need it to calculate this output right here. So then you will have to use the technique of lifting state up. And so hopefully you remember all the logic of how that works and why we have to do that. And in case there is still some doubt, you can always go back and check out the lectures where we talked about lifting up state. And of course, all the other things that you need here in this challenge. So I'm aware that this challenge is not super easy, but that's what many students actually want. So last time I asked, the large majority wanted really hard challenges. So this is not really hard, I think, but it can be a bit challenging. So it's not just 100% straightforward. Therefore, if you run into any issues, that's no problem at all. So just write the part that you can, and then the rest watch my solution. That's 100% fine. The most important part is that you start writing at least some code and that you try it on your own. And that's enough talk. I see you here in 5 or 10 or whatever time that you need. All right, so we have a lot of code to write, so let's get straight into it. So I will start with the function called tip calculator, which we will then call basically right here. So we need no styles for this app at all. So that's why I didn't provide any CSS starter files. Okay, let's close down the sidebar here. And then let's start by writing out all our components. So the next one is called bill input. Then let's create select percentage. And of course, your component names here can be completely different. Then we have function output. And finally, for reset. All right, now let's build them out one by one. And we can actually start here in the tip calculator, because all that's going to happen here is that I will basically include all the other ones. So let's just create a div here. Then I will want the bill input. I will want two select percentages. And of course, we will later on then pass the props into. Here I'm just, again, building the static parts without any data at all. So then we will have the output and we will have our reset button. Okay, let's start with this one. Okay. Then I will place this one into a label. How much was the bill? And then finally we have our first input of the type text. And let's add a placeholder as well, which is always nice. And so, yeah, here we got already some, something on the UI. I was just thinking of getting rid of this class. And so then we get rid of basically all the styling altogether. Can just come here to the CSS if we want. And just like this, just to make the font family a bit nicer on the eyes. But anyway, here let's again return a div. And then we have a select element. And as you already know, then inside the select, we have our different options. So 0 is for dissatisfied, which is 0%. Then let's just copy this over a few times. 5, 10, and 20. It was okay is 5%. Then it was good is 10%. And then 20% is for absolutely amazing. Now, we also want some text here, and so we could pass that here in as a prop, but I believe it's a lot nicer to write it right here directly. So how did you like the service? Then close that. And so basically including the content between the opening and the closing tag. How did your friend like the service? All right. And now I hope you remember how we get this text here, so this content, into select percentage. And that's right. It gets automatically passed in here as the children prop. And so let's create a paragraph or maybe a label with exactly that. There you go. That looks a lot better. So let's move on here. Return. And here we will have an H3. You pay X, which is some dollars. Let's say A plus B for the tip. So just some placeholders here for now, because we are building still the static version. And now finally here, a button that says reset. Okay, so that took us some time just to build the static part, and now let's add some state. And the best way to start is to create one piece of state for each of these three controlled elements that we need here. Now, as I started by saying in the very beginning, you could have started by creating local state right here in the component. So basically like we learned before. However, you would then quickly discover that you need this input value here, for example, right here in the tip calculator component, because it's here where you will later calculate this tip value right here, so that you can then display it, so you can pass it into output and then render it there. Therefore, I will actually basically immediately lift that state up and not even write it in the bill input. So bill and setBill are equal to use state, and for some reason, sometimes this doesn't really work with the importing. So then let's do it manually. Use state from React. Nice. And actually here, let's start with an empty string. Okay. And then we need to pass both of them in, because of course we will want to update that state each time that the change event is fired here on the input. Remember that? So that's just how controlled elements work. It's always the same recipe, always the same thing, no matter if the state lives right in this component or in another parent component. But the idea is the same, as you will see again in a minute. So let's pass in a prop called bill with the value of bill, and then let's again use our on prefix. So on set bill will be set bill. But of course, it would be just as valid to pass in a prop with exactly this name. So here we receive bill and on set bill, and let's then use these values here. So the value of this input field should be bill, and when it changes, then we want to basically set the bill based on e.target.value, and we need to convert that whole thing to a number. Okay, now unfortunately the DevTools don't work, as we experienced a few times already, but in order to see it, we can actually pass it in here into the output. So bill is bill, because remember how we actually display that bill value right here. So that's exactly this 80 right there. So let's then receive it here. So that's this first value right here. So let's see. And yeah, that works beautifully. So just like any normal controlled component or controlled element, with the difference that the state doesn't live in the component itself, but in the parent component. And now let's use the exact same logic for these select percentage components. So let's create two pieces of state, one for each of them. So that's going to be %1 and set %1. And the default here is 0. And then let's just copy paste. And so this one here will take the value of %1. So the percentage prop that this one will receive will be equal to the %1 state, while this other one, so this one also gets a percentage prop, of course, but here the value will be given by this other state. And so with this, we can use the same component to set these two different state values. Okay, and now also the onSelect handler, and this one will be set %1, while again here onSelect will be set %2. All right. Then down here, we can receive them besides the children. So the percentage and on select. And so now all we have to do is value is equal to the percentage that we receive, and then on change, and then on select. So we can immediately convert to a number, e.target.value. It's always the same recipe. So now we will not be able to immediately see it here, but it seems to be working. Both of them. All right, and so now we have all our state that we need. And so based on this, we now can already calculate the tip. So how do we do that? Should we create a new piece of state for the tip here? Well, there is actually no need, and it makes no sense to do so, because the tip can be completely calculated from the bill and the percentages. And so we are in the presence of derived state. So the tip is simply the bill times the average of the two percentages. So that's percentage 1 plus percentage 2 divided by 2, and then the whole thing divided by 100. Because here the percentages are these actual values, so between 0 and 100, but then we need to calculate them between 0 and 1, because, well, that's how we calculate percentages. And here, I don't really agree with this parenthesis here. Let's place that right here. So with this, we calculate the average percentage and convert it to a number between 0 and 1. And then simply by multiplying it with the bill, we get the amount of the tip. And so now we are ready to also pass that here into the output. I mean, here we receive it. To pass it, it's actually here. So tip equal tip. And so we can already display that here. And then here, it's as simple as adding the two together. So let's say 100 and one was dissatisfied, the other one was amazing. And so the average is 10%, which is exactly those $10. Yep, then it becomes 20, which together makes 120. Just make the dollar sign there. And so, yeah, this seems to be working just fine. All we have to do now is to make this reset button work. But that is fortunately very simple. So function handle reset. And here all we need to do is really to set all of the values back to those initial states. So set percentage 1 back to 0. And here the same thing. And then we just pass it right here. So on reset should become handle reset. Like this. And then, of course, the on click event handler on reset. And let's see. And beautiful. So everything back to normal. And now what we should do is to not display the button and this output whenever there is actually no tip. So then it makes no sense to display that, right? So these two things right here. So let's wrap them into the JavaScript mode. And then let's say bill greater than 0 and end. And now here we get a problem because we have one piece of JSX which has basically two top level elements, which is not allowed. So there can only be one parent element. And so once again, our fragment here is a very nice option. We don't need these. Give it a save, and yeah, now they're gone. And as soon as we start writing here, we have a tip value, and then we can see the output there and the button. Great, and that's actually it. So I believe the hard part here was to have all the state living in the tip calculator, but then having these two components here needing that state and also updating that state. So there's a lot of state passing around here with all of these props. Yeah, and then also here the tip itself. So realizing that this indeed needs to be derived state, because otherwise you would have to calculate this tip all over the place in order to keep it in sync with the bill and these both percentages. So that would be a lot of work. And instead, by having it as derived state, each time that the component re-renders as the state is updated, this value will be calculated again and can then also be rendered here onto the UI. Great, but that's enough talk. The video is running long enough already. And so, yeah, I just hope that you did at least part of this coding challenge. And any questions that you have, just post them in the Q&A along with your solution if you'd like. So it's always nice to see different approaches resulting in the same working application. And with this, we then actually reach the end of the section, but also of part 1, basically. All we have to do, if you want, is now a complete practice project that is coming up next. So it's a really cool project once again, and so I highly encourage you to not skip it and meet me there as soon as possible.